Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MWF annual membership meeting and the Voices in Conservation panel discussion. I'm really excited about this one. I actually woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this one. So that tells you how excited I am to be here. And everybody else that is on the panel with me is 10 times as excited as I am. So this is going to be an awesome panel for sure. I'm really, really lucky to have these folks from across the country joining us tonight. We're going to go around and you're going to get to meet them. But before we do that, I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements, a couple of housekeeping items. We would love to answer your questions. If you comment on them, we won't be able to get to them necessarily tonight, but we will go back through and we will definitely try to address any questions that you might have. If you need help or resources with the things that we talk about, reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. So with that being said, I'll kick off this round of introductions. My name is Marcus Strange. I am the Program and Partnership Director for the Montana Wildlife Federation. I work on a variety of different issues, one of them being engaging and supporting new people in the outdoors. Bringing on a new crop of people that care about and are passionate about the outdoors is something that I've been passionate about myself for a long time. I consider myself an adult onset hunter. I didn't start hunting until I was 27. And so I understand firsthand some of the barriers to entry. And so I try really hard to think about that when we do our work here at MWF, think about it from that perspective. And that's one of the things we want to talk about tonight is how do we make the outdoors a welcoming place for all people, no matter what their background or their skill level, where they're coming from. We want to make it a welcoming place. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. I think just for the sake of ease and making sure we don't talk over each other, I will call on our different panelists to introduce themselves. And what I would ask our panelists to do is tell us your name, the organization that you represent and your role with that organization. And then just for fun, so that as we have this discussion, people know a little bit about you. Would you share one outdoor pursuit that you would pick to do for the rest of your life if you could only do that one thing? So for myself, if I could only elk hunt for the rest of my life, that would be the thing I'd pick. So share that with the audience and we'll go around real quick and introduce ourselves to the folks listening. So let's start with SJ.
Hi, my name's SJ Keller. I use they, them pronouns. I am representing Queers in Camo. We are not a formal organization at this point, but we are on our way to becoming one. We started as an Instagram account, but what we really are is a community group for LGBTQ plus and two-spirit hunters, anglers, wild food enthusiasts, and anyone who wants to call themselves one of those folks. And I would say if I could only do one outdoor activity for the rest of my life, I don't want to sound like I'm copying Marcus, but I think it has to be elk hunting.
That is a good pick. So the Team Elk is winning so far. Let's pass it over to Marcia.
Hi, I'm Marcia Brownlee. I am the program manager for Artemis Sportswomen. Artemis is an initiative of the National Wildlife Federation that engages women hunters and anglers in conservation advocacy and creates a dynamic community of sportswomen. We here in Montana, we are piloting our Montana Artemis Alliance, which is a Montana Wildlife Federation affiliate. They're getting running this year, and this is our first official summit with you guys, so we're pretty stoked for that. You know, I think I think my answer to that last question is a little bounded by time, and I'm going to have to say antelope. If I could pursue one animal for the rest of my life, it might be the antelope through the sagebrush.
That is a fantastic answer. Next, Anna, would you introduce yourself to everyone?
So my name is Anna. I'm not affiliated with an organization, but I'll probably give a shout out to Brown Folks Fishing. They do really amazing work. Trying to just be inclusive in the outdoor environment within like the fishing community. So if you're wanting to get into fishing, definitely check them out. Sorry, I go by she, her pronouns. And if I can be in one percent of an animal, it'd probably be just cutthroat trout or just like the macroinvertebrates. If I can just put on like a snorkeling mask and just stick my face underneath the water and just watch them like crawl around, I'd probably just do that for the rest of my life.
That is awesome. Yeah, cutthroat trout. It's hard to beat cutthroat trout. And last but definitely not least, Jimmy, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Flatt. I'm here with Hunters of Color. I go by he, him pronouns. And Hunters of Color focuses on incorporating more people of color into the hunting and outdoor industry and environment. And we're trying to increase inclusivity through representation, through mentorships and sponsored hunts. We're just getting started off. We started off, I think, about 6 weeks ago, and we've blown up since. And this is our first summit, so thanks for having us. Oh, and I think I'm gonna have to jump on the bandwagon here and go with elk, but archery, elk, and earn the rep. That's what I would love to do the rest of my life.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you all sharing your pronouns. I should have shared mine at the beginning. I use he, him pronouns. I want to kick off the formal part of our discussion by just resharing the title of this panel that we're doing tonight. The title of this panel is Voices in Conservation, Speaking Up for Wildlife and Wildlands While Diversifying the Outdoors. And I want to kick off our discussion tonight with a really simple question. Why are we having this discussion? What has brought us all here tonight? And why, as an organization that is promoting hunting, fishing, public access, wildlands, is having a discussion about diversifying the outdoors an important discussion to have?
I could take that.
Jimmy, perfect. Thank you.
So the issue that we're trying to tackle with when we bring up race is that when you do a survey, which was done in 2016, 96% of hunters are of European descent, white hunters. Now that's not a bad thing, but with the current way that the census is going in this country and the makeup of our ethnic backgrounds, by the year 2044, minorities will be the majority in this country. And if we don't get minorities into hunting and conservation now, then we are going to be fighting a losing battle in the future. But basically the issue is that, well, there's no issue, but there's funding that's associated with conservation. And if the money's not there, then there won't be the funding needed to take care of the natural resource that hunters tap into. And I think all of us here want to see these natural resources stay intact and be here for generations to come.
Absolutely. There's a huge funding gap that needs to be addressed. And there's a growing interest among people that look different than I do in getting into the outdoors and filling that gap. And I appreciate you sharing that study. That was a really important study that was done. I want to throw it over to SJ, but real quick, if you have a comment or you want to jump in, probably the easiest way for us to do this and not talk over each other will be to raise your hand like that, and I'll just call on you that way. That way we don't have to worry about talking over each other. You all are very polite. SJ, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to build on what Jimmy was talking about and take it back to the North American model of wildlife conservation, and especially the piece about equality of opportunity and equality of access. And I don't think we're there at this point. And I think we'd all like to see us get there for the reasons that that Jimmy is talking about. And when I'm talking to other people and people in my demographic and age group about the North American model, I like to think about it as encourage people to think about it as sort of something that's living and that we all have stewardship over, to make sure that we continue to have these opportunities and wildlife resources. And for me, a big piece of that means inclusivity, and then to take it down to a personal level, in talking on my personal experience, and then through speaking out about my personal experience as a young hunter and angler, I felt very alienated from the hunting culture I grew up in. And as I've been talking to more and more LGBTQ people about this, I'm seeing a lot of returning and reactivating and new hunters coming in. And I think that's something we'd all love to see. And we need to make a place for all those folks.
Marcia.
Just adding on to everything that Jimmy and SJ have said, I think we talk a lot about R3 in the recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters. But I've increasingly seen more and more conversation about a fourth R of relevancy. I think when we're talking about the story of who hunts and fishes and why they hunt and fish, the more stories we can tell about what it means to people from across the country and across the world, the more relevant it becomes, and the more relatable stories that are out there for people to pick up on and connect to.
Anna, please.
So hopping off of what everyone's been saying so far, I don't have a hunting background. So sorry, again, my background is in like the fishery biology world and environmental education world. So coming from it from like a conservation and science aspect, like SJ mentioned before, with recruiting stewardship and protecting the environment and wildlife, and kind of like being out there to see what you're catching and being connected back into it, having these diverse perspectives and audiences to really be out there and include different perspectives and how to go about conservation management. I think Jimmy mentioned before, like every natural resources and who has access to it right now are mostly European descents, which is not necessarily bad, but we want to be more inclusive and mindful of who's actually having these accessibilities to these natural resources that we're talking about.
And I'll just throw my 2 cents in here. We talk a lot about hunters and anglers, but we need to broaden, as we have this discussion about diversifying the outdoors, we need to broaden that tent a little bit, and we should be talking about outdoor enthusiasts, folks that love the outdoors. The local board movement is a really important movement, and these different groups that care about the outdoors, it can't be a homogenous group. It needs to be a diverse group of people that care about this. Otherwise, we will continue to lose opportunity, we will continue to lose access, we'll continue to lose habitat, because we're not reaching out and inviting and engaging with the folks who are the most passionate about it. So I just wanted to make that clarification, that as we talk about this, we're not just talking about hunters and anglers. You don't have to, you don't have to go elk hunt in the mountains in the middle of winter to get engaged in this issue. So I think that's really a really important distinction to make. The other thing, sorry, did anybody have anything else they wanted to add to that before I throw out another question that we had? No? Okay. So the other thing that I've been thinking about as we prepared for this discussion about diversifying the outdoors is, why should traditional sporting, hunting, outdoor organizations care about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice? Why is this a topic? A lot of these groups have a very narrow focus. So when we're talking about diversifying the outdoor space, why is this something that they should care about?
I can start off again.
Perfect.
So they should care because if we only have one group of people hunting and fishing, caring about the outdoors, then eventually those people are going to disappear. They're not going to pass it down to the next generation, or if they do, they're going to pass it down to their kind of people, and not include other people who can have a different perspective or add to the toolbox of people who will eventually help preserve, conserve, and protect the things that we hold dear, which is access to wild places, and ultimately for hunters and anglers who try to feed their family with the resources that are provided to them through these wild places. So I think that everybody should be looking to be more inclusive so that they bring more perspectives to the table to solve a big problem that this country has, where hunter numbers have been going down since the 70s and recruitment hasn't been there. So the more people we bring up to the plate, I think the better off we'll be as a community.
Thank you. Marcia, let's go to you next.
I think Jimmy nailed it. Like, that's definitely one of the strongest reasons to intentionally and actively do outreach. I think a lot of it also rests on just shared values that I know I bring with me to conservation work and to the sporting field, about deeply and truly and sincerely believing that we make better decisions when we make them together. And I think if we're making decisions for what we want our wild places and our wildlife to look like in the future, we need to have as many people at the table as possible. And I think to a certain extent, the conservation movement understands that when we're talking about bringing together outdoor recreationists and hunters and anglers and ranchers and agriculture, we understand that diversity of perspectives is important in making good decisions moving forward. And we just need to make sure that we're including a broader definition of inclusivity and diversity when we're talking about moving forward together. And I also think, for me personally, becoming a hunter, because I also came to it as an adult. I didn't start hunting until I was in my 30s. And it changed the way that I felt about the natural world. And it changed my conviction and my commitment to conservation and to wildlife. And I think there's just so much value in inherently sharing what you love and with as many people as possible.
Go ahead, Ashay.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said so far, and I'll add that in some cases, those folks who may represent diverse backgrounds are already in those organizations. They just can't show up as themselves. And I guess this is speaking specifically about LGBTQ people that may not be out in those organizations, and that is a pretty painful way to go about doing conservation work, kind of in a sense, having a sense of fear. And I will just say from personal experience, being able to be out in the hunting community has made me better at the work that I do. And so by providing an environment where people can show up as their best and full selves, I think you're going to get better conservationists in the long run.
Go ahead, Anna.
I love what SJ mentioned about just creating a safe space for people to actually be vulnerable and, going out and wanting to recreate or hunt and fish. I know oftentimes people feel uncomfortable or unsafe in the outdoor environment because of the demographic that's out there, or like what kind of culture that's already perpetuating out there. So if organizations just keep in mind about like the efforts and actually putting progress out there to make it into a more inclusive environment, whatever that may mean, meaning like more accessibility, talking to people, having more diverse perspectives and backgrounds, cultural incorporation, just making it as creating a safe space as much as possible for folks to actually be comfortable to go out and see what should be protected. And I think Marcia made a really good point of like, I didn't start camping until my college years, and I had no idea what I was doing, but my friends made it a safe space for me to actually be able to ask questions and go out and like try things out and be vulnerable with it. And that actually just perpetuated and kickstarted my love for the outdoors and the passion. Without that, I would have never cared as much as I do now. So I think having that safe space is very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. The ability to feel safe and to make mistakes and ask questions is paramount in this work that we're trying to do. So a question that's arisen for me during this discussion is, what does diversity, equity, inclusion, like what does that look like in the outdoor spaces? We're having this conversation. I think it'd be really beneficial for us to define what that looks like. And that may be different for individual people, but if one of you could take a stab at describing what that world looks like, I think that would be helpful. Maybe paint a picture for what we're trying to get to down the road. Go ahead, Jimmy.
I hate taking this first, but I have an answer, and it kind of lines up with, so the demographics of the U.S. Since the last census, there's 60% white, or 61% white, 18% Hispanic, 13% Black, and I think whatever the rest is other. And ideally, when hunters of color has no purpose anymore, we'll see that all those demographics line up with the hunting community. We'll see that the people who are buying licenses match up or close to, if not right on top of where the US Census is. I know it's going to be hard to reach some cultures that have never hunted before, but we'd love to incorporate everybody and at least give them the shot to experience hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation in a whole.
I like that. That's a great start. SJ?
Yeah, Marcus, it's a great question. I had to think for a second because I've been asking myself this in the formation of Queers in Camo. And I think with the discussions we're seeing around justice in the hunting world and the outdoor recreation world in general, I think we have a great opportunity to rethink what our organizations look like as we create new ones, and as people within longstanding organizations rethink them. And that's an area where I don't even want to pretend to have all the answers. And I'm actually kind of going through a process now, asking a lot of people what that world looks like to them, because I don't know that it's really for me to define. I think it's handing over a lot of the decision power to people who don't necessarily look or think like me, and just making more space for perhaps a hunting and conservation outdoor culture that isn't necessarily exactly what we're used to, and it has more choices for people when they're kind of choosing their niche within the culture, if that makes sense. It's a little bit of a vague picture, but
Well, I think it's a hard to define answer necessarily, because it's going to look different for, depending on who you talk to, the different groups, your answer and Jimmy's answer and Hannah's answer and Marcia's answer, my answer, because we all represent different groups that need that inclusivity. Those groups are going to need different things. And so I think the important thing is that we continue to ask these questions, and that's where we'll find the answers, is if we continue to question and ask the people who it impacts. And Marcia, your group is doing a lot of interesting work around this in providing an opportunity for women specifically to step into the outdoors. How has it been trying to craft this idea of what, as Jimmy put it, the day when Artemis is no longer needed? How have you approached that? Yeah,
that's something I say quite often about Artemis is our ultimate goal is to not be needed anymore. I think we're a ways from that, but we're working towards it. And I think for me, in particular with that, the goal, we do a lot of storytelling with Artemis and a lot of connection. So people have the support that they need and whatever path that they're on. But I think, ultimately what we're striving for is for the women's voice in the sporting community and in the conservation community to no longer be unique or unusual, to no longer be a lesser story or the lesser heard story, or, I think there's this big picture of what it means to be a hunter that I know I found discouraging when I was trying to enter the field as a hunter, about what a good hunt looks like. And it's usually quite epic and, it's deeper, faster, harder. And that's not how I hunt. And that's not how a lot of people hunt. And so I think the broader story we're telling, and the more those stories become unique, the closer we will be to the goal. Does that, I don't know if I think I got sidetracked from your question. Does that answer your question?
No, you absolutely answered it. That was a great answer. Thank you. Anna, did you want to add anything to this particular topic?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like the conservation and science management side to natural resources, I'm hoping DEI looks like in the future is like more shift in creating more space for people with like LGBTQ plus backgrounds and people of color and women to actually have the space to move up on in the agency, whether it's governmental agencies or nonprofit working within natural resources and conservation. I would love to see like cultural practices implemented into management of natural resources. So as everyone can tell, what's been happening for the past couple of weeks, especially with forest fires, I would love to see just like more indigenous practices implemented and incorporated into natural resources conservation. Just like the cultural imperialism, one-sided movement of ways to go about conservation and management can be shifted a little bit and kind of just shift that culture and push the boundary a little bit to actually incorporate more diverse perspectives and cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I thought I saw another hand. Was someone wanting to jump in? Go ahead.
I think you could see that I was maybe thinking about saying something else.
I felt it. I felt the energy.
Yeah, you could feel it through the Zoom. I get that. I was thinking a little bit more about what this looks like and relating it back to some of my hunting experiences from the last week in central Montana. And I kind of got a lot of looks out there. I have to admit, like people were like, there were no other women out there hunting or like no people who weren't men basically. And I felt pretty under the microscope, I have to admit, and, had a very helpful gentleman, but he called me honey a bunch, and that was pretty uncomfortable for me. And that's very kind of like basic stuff. And, I'm a white person who presents as a woman and fits in pretty well when I'm wearing camo, but I still felt very, very seen and pretty vulnerable. And I think, maybe the day a trans person of color can go hunting solo in the Missouri River breaks and feel like they are, kind of not a big deal out there, that maybe that's what the future looks like. And not because there are necessarily so many people doing that thing, but because there has been enough inclusion throughout that people who stick out don't stick out anymore. We have a long ways to go though.
Anna, back to you.
SJ, totally relatable. Went fishing a couple weeks ago, and this older gentleman just stopped me in my track and was like, "Can I ask you a question?" Thinking that he was going to ask something relating to fisheries or just fish in general. And he just ended up asking if I was Chinese, and just kept going down this like long winding road. And I was like, this is not something I would like to deal with in the outdoor environment. Kind of would like to just, take the weekend to myself, enjoy the waters, and be out there to actually do what I came out to do and not have these conversations with people. So I really agree with SJ of just like, hopefully in the future, like everyone, especially like me and my friends and my colleagues and all of you guys, can actually just go out and go hunting and fishing and actually do it for recreation purposes and food security purposes without feeling unsafe, and having that thought in the back of your mind of like, who am I going to run into today? What do I have to talk about? Am I going to have to educate someone today about something I don't really have the mental capacity for? And just not be a quote unquote like exotic person standing out, and just, you know, be yourself, but actually fit in with the environment, whatever that may look like.
And maybe that's the metric that we're shooting for, is when everyone can go into the outdoors and the only thing on their mind is the activity that they're going into the outdoors to participate in. That will be a beautiful day when we get there. So tying into this discussion, I'm sorry, did anybody want to add anything else? This is really great. I don't want to pivot us off of this if there's more great insights. No? Okay. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, because I've been, helping our organization incorporate more of our values around this topic, is what are some tangible things organizations out there can do to incorporate inclusion and diversity into their organization. A lot of these organizations are small conservation groups. They have maybe 25 to 100 members if they're lucky. They've got a lot of things going on because they're mostly volunteers. So in that context, and I think about a lot of our amazing fish and wildlife focused nonprofits here in the state, how can they incorporate these elements of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice into the work that they're already doing? Anna.
Jimmy, you don't have to go first this time. You're welcome. So I guess like what a really good focus on is like educational materials, and how like nonprofit orgs or just governmental agencies are going about their educational and outreach materials. If you're looking at the demographics within a certain location or community, or within like a general broad state, and seeing like, okay, after white, like what is the next largest minority group, and then kind of centralizing your outreach and education materials like that. And then if you're looking at hunting regulations and fishing regulations, like how often do you see it in a different language, right? And so that accessibility of like putting something as simple as fishing and hunting regulations to make it more inclusive for different communities and diverse audiences to really take back control and power and knowledge to actually understand what they're hunting and fishing, the regulations that's going into it. So there is no mistakes happening, and people actually feel comfortable and safe enough to actually approach the hobby or opportunity. And what I've been seeing recently with a bunch of organizations is that tokenizations of people of color and LGBTQ plus communities, and then how you're approaching the individual, whether it's a good intention or bad intention, but a lot of organizations nowadays are using that platform and using people for their advantage and just tokenizing them and saying like, this is the bare minimum that we're going to do. This is just another box to check for either grants or funding, and kind of just shifting that perspective and culture and how you're approaching wanting to be more inclusive is a really good start and a better intention than just saying like, we're just going to have one person of color, and that means that this group is diverse. So.
Go ahead, SJ.
I'm trying to think of things that aren't super time consuming, considering, volunteer groups that might already be stretched. But I would ask the people in those organizations to do a little bit of deep thinking while they're out on their hunts or fishing or whatever. And they're, when they've got some free brain space, and ask themselves why there aren't people who don't look like them in their organizations, and do some introspection around that. And then, I think there's so many resources out there already on allyship in the outdoors. However, they are not necessarily geared towards people in the consumptive recreation or conservation world, I've noticed. And it's actually kind of a project I'm hoping to work on. But there are plenty of organizations out there, like Melanin Base Camp, for example, has great information on their website about outdoor allyship. And I think distribute those resources to your membership, and then make donations to the organizations that created those resources. That doesn't have to be, something outrageous, but within your means, of course, but to recognize that labor. And then also don't, if you're inviting people from underrepresented communities into the organization and basically asking them for labor, please pay them for that labor. Those could go on, but I'll stop.
I think that's a great place to start. Real quick before I pivot to Marcia, we've got a couple things coming in from audience members. Zach wanted to know if there's a difference between hunting and fishing conservation groups and groups that are hunting based. And I'll just field this real quick. The diversity of groups and what they focus on is astounding. There are groups that will focus on hunting and fishing and then wildlife conservation. And then there will be groups, Zach, to answer your question, who do only focus on the hunting and getting people involved in hunting. So yes, there's a difference, and you should definitely, before you join a group, find out what their focus is. And that's pretty easy to do. You can be going to a meeting or checking out their website. Yeah, it's a great question. And then Mary commented and said, normalizing being outdoors and not looking like the stereotypical person is important. So thank you for that, Mary. We appreciate you supporting that concept, which should not be a novel concept, but unfortunately it is kind of a novel concept. So with that being said, Marcia, let's pivot to you and hear your thoughts.
Yeah, just to adding on to what SJ was just talking about, I think organizational change requires personal change. And so I think if you're a conservation organization who wants to commit to equity and justice, that involves a personal commitment in addition to an organizational commitment. And so I think really, really listening to what's being said and engaging on a personal level and knowing that you're probably going to be uncomfortable at some point and leaning into that.
Yeah, the concept of when you know better, do better is a very powerful thing. And a lot of times that takes one person stepping up within an organization and calling out bad behavior, or maybe not, maybe just pointing out and saying something like, hey, for this event that we're posting on Facebook, could we make this language a little more friendly, open, and inviting to people that are different than our group? It can be something as simple as that. I don't want to cut anybody off, but I have another really fascinating question from an audience member, if you're all ready to tackle a new question. Anna's smiling, so I'm going to take that as a yes. So this person asked, what can people who want to be allies do to help share in a genuine and meaningful way? So I guess I'll broaden it a little bit. What can allies of diversity and inclusion do? What are some actionable steps they can take? SJ?
Great. So I think we often focus on what people shouldn't be doing. And so I'm going to skip that right now and let other folks take that if they want. But what I've been thinking about a lot lately is what people have done right that I've seen. And I think one big thing is anytime you see someone stick their neck out for other people or for themselves and, show difference or difference of opinion, if you agree with them and you've been too afraid to speak up, now's your time to support that person. And if you see the same person sticking their neck out for underrepresented folks over and over again, consider that you might next want to be the person who fills that role, because then you start a movement that way and it gains momentum. And it's very similar to the way conservation culture builds, I think. I think it really starts with people taking ownership of a problem and deciding that it's their turn. And so I think one of the biggest things folks can do is take ownership over supporting folks in a really positive way when they see them show up. And I think that's a very genuine thing that will show through.
Hannah?
I love how you highlighted the positive instead of the negative, SJ. So just like hopping off of that, I would love to see more accountability and just like holding your good old boys or good old girls club accountable when you hear something that's just ignorant or racist, and not just turning a blind eye just because they're your friend or your family members. And as uncomfortable as it is, it's more uncomfortable for the other person experiencing it and hearing those words, and they come off more harmful and hurtful than anything. And just those few words in an outdoor environment while you're doing any recreational like hobbies can be such a turnoff for that person. So holding each other accountable, being anti-racist, it's not even enough to not be racist anymore. It's just about being anti-racist and just calling it out immediately when you see it, not tolerating it. Again, not turning a blind eye, and coming from a place where you're willing to learn. So listening to understand and learn rather than to criticize or judge, I think is really important. Especially if you want to have this tough conversation, you're going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. But if you're coming at it with good intentions and wanting to learn, that's a really good place to be. And then especially if you want good resources, do some research, ask your friends to give you some resources, but don't expect your friends within marginalized communities to take the time to educate you, because again, it's not anyone's job who's been traumatized or gone through this over and over again to have that burden and take that time to educate you. And there are plenty of resources out there and plenty of folks who are paid to do this work for us.
Just like finding a spot to hunt. It's okay to ask maybe once, hey, can you help me find a spot to hunt? But eventually you got to figure out your own spots to hunt. So parallels, people, parallels. I wanted to, real quick before I go to Jimmy and Marcia, because I think both of you have some really good insights on this. If someone in your circle is brave enough to bring something up to you, no matter how hard that thing is, it is incredibly important to hold space for that feedback. Even if you 100% think they are wrong, even if it hurts you, even if you feel personally attacked, if someone brings up something about this topic of diversity in your organization or to you personally, the most important thing is right away hold space for that. And if you need to take a little while to think on it before you respond, I would highly recommend doing that, because that person really put themselves out there, and that is something that should be held sacred. So I'm throwing that out there. I don't know exactly why this thought came to me, but I think it's really important that if someone, and I'm just throwing this out here as an example, says, hey, I didn't feel super welcomed the last time. I don't know if I want to come back. Don't start explaining why they're wrong. Think on that and then find out why they didn't. They're not just saying it for no reason. So I'll pass the torch to someone else. Jimmy, do you want to go next? Perfect.
So we have this shirt right here. It says, "You're welcome in my camp." And we really focus on that for people who want to help our mission. And I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for an ally who reached out to me and my dad when I was 8 years old and invited us out on our first hunt. And I don't think they were doing it because of racial issues or I don't think that it came from like the bottom of their heart, and it was genuine, and they really wanted us to have a good time. And it hooked me on that first experience. So because of that, it's bred my passion for the outdoors and my passion for conservation. And I think if you come at it from a genuine place and you just want to share your passion with other people, that'll carry out a lot further than if you have kind of some guilt behind it. So come from it from a genuine standpoint and just show people why you love the outdoors and why it means so much to you. I think that's the most important thing for our allies to do.
Thank you. That was really good. Appreciate that. Marcia, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I feel like I should have gone first now, Jimmy, because that was just the perfect note to end on. But I think one thing that always comes to mind for me, particularly in my role with Artemis, is, I think it's human nature, and it's to approach some things with a scarcity mentality, and with a fear of a loss of power or a loss of control. And I think when we're talking about being an ally in the conservation space, we really need to focus on power sharing, and how that will help us all move forward on our values of conservation and our goals.
Perfect. Thank you. We had an audience question. I'm going to throw this one to Anna specifically. How can we ensure that diversity in organizations is not just with it's not just the top people, the board president, the maybe one or two paid staff that they have, but how can we make sure that it's throughout the membership and everyone at those lower levels of an organization? And then if anybody else has thoughts after Anna goes, I'd love to hear them as well.
Yeah, great question. That's been probably an ongoing question as of right now of like who's being held accountable, especially at the leadership level. It's not just about staff and employees right now. It's not about who's getting hired based on their background, but it's also like who's at the top making these executive and leadership decisions, right? So I think having this accountability, and also when you're applying for positions, or especially with like Artemis and Hunters of Color and Queers in Camo, when you're partnering up with organization, just, asking that question too, and be like, hey, how many women do you have on staff? Oh, you don't have any, but like, why is that so? Historically, has there been any women? And then just, asking those tough questions, and then making that leadership and board members and executive directors think upon, hey, like, who are we hiring? Who's in this leadership position? And then also highlighting too, like, who you're working with and who you're working for as well. I think that's really important to go about approaching it, especially if you want to see more inclusivity in conservation. It's like, how many people are we seeing at that leadership position? How many people are leaving and making space for others? So I think, communicating with each other, especially in that conservation organization, where I'm being like, hey, you should check out this person because they're doing great work. I love how SJ just gave a shout out to another group earlier. So I think that's a really great job of like highlighting the people who are actually having the leadership in a diverse aspect. And then also just giving a heads up to other folks of like, watch out for this organization. They may not be ready to work with people or have the space to hold and support people of color or underrepresented communities.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Marcia.
Adding to that, I think one of the things that I've come to be more aware of with the work that I'm doing, elevating women in conservation leadership roles, is the importance of sponsorship. And, I think there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And mentorship is, as we know, just helping somebody learn the role and what it means to be in that role. But sponsorship is actually saying, oh yeah, we've got a board on this commission that's open. You should look at SJ for it. She'd be great. And just kind of branching out of that network and making sure that new voices are being recommended for these leadership roles. And then once they're there, making sure that the table is not only diverse, but that it's inclusive, right? So making sure that not only are we bringing different voices to the table, but when they contribute, they're listened to, and the input that they have is allowed to impact the outcome. Because I think that's the next step. It doesn't always happen at the same time. But I think the more that we ensure that that happens around the table when decisions are being made, the more likely people are to stay in those roles and to continue to advance their leadership.
I like that. That's really important. And that's where I think the leadership can start to change that culture by modeling that and making sure, as you were saying, that that table is not only diverse, but inclusive. So thank you. Mary, one of the audience members, made a really good point that we need to be careful of making assumptions based on how people look. That should go without saying, that this is not necessarily about how people look. And so we need to be careful as people are trying to be allies, that you're not assuming things based on appearance. So thank you for that note. That's an important distinction to make. We're getting close to the end of our time, and so I wanted to give each of you an opportunity for your final thoughts. And so feel free to share whatever you so desire on this topic. We'd love to hear your elevator pitch here at the end. And as you wrap up, tell folks how you can, or how they can reach out and support your organizations. That's something we've been getting a lot of questions about. Folks want to pitch in and help and support you all. So let's start with Jimmy, and we'll go from there.
So, man, you put me on the spot. Well, so anybody can get involved with Hunters of Color. What we really are in the need for right now are mentors and people who want to generously share the passion for the outdoors with people. And it doesn't have to be people of color. It just has to be anybody. But right now, we just need recruitment. And we are personally also looking for applicants who want to be a mentee, who have an interest in getting out into the outdoors, but have no, they don't know where to start. And so what we want to do is pair people up with mentors across the country and figure out a way for them to get out to fishing, camping. Maybe it's just a picnic, or a walk around a local lake or something like that. It starts little by little, and eventually it'll turn into what I think is the pinnacle of outdoor recreation, which is hunting and fishing. And at that point, you can't avoid loving it, and you can't avoid wanting to preserve it. And so I think if we, as our goal, we'd love to see more people of color out in the outdoors, and we'd love to see those numbers slowly progress towards what the demographics of the country are. And what it's going to take is a lot of money, a lot of mentorship, a lot of hours, and eventually we'll have a lot of people on board, and we'll see a more colored outdoors.
Thank you, Jimmy. Anna, would you go next?
Sure. I don't really have an organization, I guess, of my own, but again, I'll shout out Brown Folks Fishing, because they're just doing great work creating a space to be more inclusive within the fishing community. So I definitely reach out to them and check out other folks within the Brown Folks Fishing community who are actually doing the DEI work and getting paid to do so. And if you just want to get into fishing or learn more about how to just be more inclusive on the waters, definitely check them out, reach out to them. They're super lovely, helpful people. And then for those of you at home who are tuned in right now and just want to get started in the fishing world, or feel uncomfortable and unsafe right now doing so, feel free to reach out to me and ask any questions. I'm here to support you as much as I can. And I guess in terms of what else people can do at home, go out and vote, right? November 3rd is coming up. So whether or not you're voting in person or mail-in ballots, that's really important to get your vote in and have your voices be heard, especially in conservation. And then just keep up to date with other organizations that are doing great work. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and Brown Folks Fishing, I just checked out their Instagram. It's just Brown Folks Fishing on Instagram, and then they have the links to how you can get involved with them. So thank you for highlighting them. They're a really cool group.
Absolutely. And they have a website right now. And yeah, their ambassadors are very, very helpful. A lot of fishing outings throughout the state. So yeah, just get connected with someone. And that's how I got started in fly fishing myself, was just talking to a couple of folks here in Colorado and then just meeting up with them.
Very cool. Thank you. SJ, would you go next?
Yeah, so just a final thought before I talk more specifically about queers and camo stuff. I think this conversation and even my own personal ability to be here represents a huge amount of change in the hunting, angling, outdoor conservation world, even in the last 5 years. But, you know, personally, I've always been into conservation stuff, but I really, I wasn't out until my 20s, and I really wasn't a return hunter until my 20s. And so these pursuits have been huge in me being able to show up in the world as myself. And I think that now I'm seeing how other people are able to do that as well, and it's really exciting, just on a, you know, person to person level. I think Artemis has been hugely influential in that, and making the space. The person who helped me start Queers in Camo was also an Artemis ambassador, and just seeing another queer person speaking out on the Artemis blog was, you know, kind of what gave me the bravery to contact Taylor Morton and talk about starting something like this. So that I'm telling you all that, not just to like shout out to Artemis, but because I think change makes space for more change. And so that's really positive. So as far as Queers in Camo and how to get involved more, you know, we're really still in the community building phase. So if you are an LGBTQ plus person, or if you know anyone who is, or if you're an ally and you want to participate and get involved, you can follow us at Queers in Camo on Instagram. We don't have a website yet, we're working on it. You can contact us at queersincamo@gmail.com if you are not a social media person. We also have a discussion group on the Slack platform that is just getting going. If you are someone who wants to meet other folks and just kind of get engaged that way, and that's also a good avenue into shaping the organization as well. So if you feel really passionate about this and you want to help us shape the direction it goes in, please contact us. That's all.
Fantastic. And the Slack channel is awesome. I'm a community member there, and it is a really good time. Great discussions had there. Oh, sorry. If there's time, I just wanted to add one last thing, just to give a sense of what Marcus, you were in one of our last discussions, what the last online meetup we had was like. We had a Zoom meetup, and we had discussions about squirrel hunting recipes, shotgun silencers, fishing lures, and whether or not to come out to your hunting buddies, and also hunting on your vegan friend's land. So it was great. Very cool. Thank you. And Marcia, would you go next?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we do is a lot of storytelling to amplify different voices throughout the hunting and fishing and conservation world. And we do a lot of that through our podcast. It's called the Artemis Podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And you'll find great podcast with SJ and Taylor, who was the other ambassador we mentioned when they launched Queers in Camo. And then we also have a fabulous podcast with Tracy Winchung, who is the founder of Brown Folks Fishing, in addition to a bunch of other really wonderful stories. So I would love it if everybody went to check that out. As I mentioned, Artemis is an initiative of the National Wildlife Federation. Our website is artemis.nwf.org. And I encourage everybody to go there and join us if you're interested in helping connect women across the country. As hunters, anglers, and conservationists, we offer a lot of support in building that community and in educating people on conservation issues and supporting them to be effective advocates for conservation.
Excellent. Go ahead.
I forgot to mention, you can find us on Instagram, Hunters of Color. And then if we also have huntersofcolor.com. You can always DM us on Instagram if you have hunting, fishing questions, anything. I love doing anything outdoors. So if I don't know it, then it'll be a learning experience for the both of us. If you only email, you can email me at jimmy@huntersofcolor.com. And then for anybody who's in Oregon, specifically around Corvallis area, reach out, and I'd love to get anybody out there who just wants an experience outdoors and wants somebody to have a good time with. So don't be afraid to reach out, and I look forward to meeting everybody who wants to get into wildlife conservation.
Awesome. I'm glad you said that. Also, I follow you guys on Instagram, and it's a fantastic follow. There's a lot of really good profiles of hunters, and yeah, great content. So thank you for bringing that up. We are out of time, unfortunately. There's a lot of great questions coming in, and we'll definitely follow up with those questions after we hang up here. Give us a couple days. We are pretty busy with the MWF events going on tomorrow, so give us a little bit of time. Feel free to reach out to any of the panelists. I'm going to volunteer them for that, and they would love to help you. I'll just wrap up by saying that at MWF we are committed, and our these values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice are part of who we are. And we are trying to do better and committed to doing better and step up in this space. So we want to continue this. This is the beginning of a conversation. This is not a final conversation. This is something that we need to continue talking about. And I encourage you all to talk about this with your friends and your family and people in your circles. If you heard something on this, I encourage you to talk to your buddies, talk to your friends and say, hey, I heard this panel discussion and they said this. I'm not sure how I feel about this, or do you have any insights? And I'm not just talking about reaching out to your LGBTQ plus friends. I'm not just talking about reaching out to your friends of color. I'm talking about reaching out to your friends that look like you. Start this discussion with your friends and your family. It's really, it's a really great way to make some change in this space and to be a better ally. The last thing I wanted to say is if you are in Montana and this is something that's important to you, the Montana Wildlife Federation would love to hear from you. Reach out to us. You can reach us through our social media channels. You can get a hold of me. My email is on our website, but if you want to write it down, it's mstrange@mtwf.org. I'd be happy to chat with you. There were some great questions that came in. If you want to shoot me an email with those questions, love to chat with you via email. With that being said, we've got a great slot of events tomorrow, so I encourage you to go and sign up for our remaining events. And we look forward to doing this again in a year. This is going to be an annual thing that we do with MWF, is having this discussion and other discussions around conservation. So please tune back in. Before I let you all go, any final thoughts that we didn't get to cover? I want to make sure everybody got to talk. Awesome. Thanks to our panelists. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you out there. Later.